Welcome everybody to, is this our second last webinar, I think? Put on by the associations, the Rett associations of BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. We welcome you to these webinars. So far, they've been amazing, and we are so pleased to have Karen Congram with us today. I asked that everybody, sorry about that, ask that everybody stay on mute and save your questions for the end. If you feel like you can't remember them, feel free to post them in the chat and I will ask Karen when we get to the end. Karen, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, thanks, Lindsay. So I am Karen Congram, and I'm in Ontario, coming to you from Stratford, Ontario, at a high school where I work. I have a daughter with Rett syndrome, Abby, who's more famous than I am, so you can call me Abby's mom. So I'm working to support students in inclusive education setting in high school. And so some of my sort of tips and tricks come to you from experience at work, and some are from being a mom. So I'm going to get started, and I know that people can put questions in the chat. If you have follow-up questions afterwards, you are welcome to contact me. So I'm going to share my screen here so that you can see that contact information. And I'm hoping you can see a blue screen right now with my name and my email address, which is educongram@gmail.com. I have more than one email address, but that's the one going forward because I may not be working here much longer. I'm retiring soon. Anyway, here's the outline of what we wanted to cover, which we may or may not get to all of it. There is a handout in the chat, which you can access, which has pretty much the same information. So I did want to talk to you briefly about how talking about school is a huge topic. And so I won't be covering a lot of things that some people might want to know about, but you're welcome to reach out to me, or I would suggest get in touch with your provincial local association to find out who can help you with school issues, because there's a lot of differences from province to province. So I'm not going to be talking about a lot of legal kind of things, but to give you some hopefully practical tips on things you can watch for and think about when supporting a child with Rett syndrome. If you're watching this and you're working at a school, hopefully some of the same things apply, but this is mostly geared to parents. So some system level things to think about. This is just lots of text here really to keep me on track, but each province has some kind of Ministry of Education and territory, and they have lots and lots of publicly available information. So if you haven't already discovered that, usually Google's your friend. You can get information on curriculum, on policies, on the latest research, and there's often lots of really useful information. So if your kid is in grade 5 math and you're kind of curious what regular grade 5s are doing for math, obviously you can ask the teacher, but that's a place you can go, is to look on the websites. I would like to just mention briefly categories of exceptionalities, which is called different things in different provinces and territories, but to beware of labels. So in Ontario, we have a label called developmental disability. And in the medical field, it means something different than in education. So in medical jargon, so to speak, they refer to, developmental delay and the fact that your child's development might be coming at a different pace than others. In education, there's a big long definition for it in the Ontario Education Act, but part of it says it's a severe learning disorder characterized by a limited potential for academic learning, independent social adjustment, and economic self-support, which we know is not accurate for Rett syndrome, and probably for most students, in fact. In Ontario, that is very out of date, the categories, but you're also kind of stuck with having to give the kids a label so that they can have an individual education plan. And so there's lots of ins and outs to that, but there's much better labels than developmental disability. So that would be one I would want to avoid. Another one is behavior, which is a crazy label to give any kid, but by definition, the behavior label should only be used if their behavior cannot be explained by something else. So there are behaviors that I know for our daughter, she had a support plan because sometimes she hit herself, which is a whole other can of worms, but some people might label that as a behavior problem when we know it's a neurological condition issue. So I would just kind of be aware of those things, and that it might seem innocuous to you when you're picking things in meetings, but that it might have an underlying judgment involved. And we don't want to do anything more to make people think students with Rett syndrome are not able to learn. Another thing just to be aware of, individual education plans or individual program plans are things that come up with lots of paperwork and legal speak, and sometimes it's overwhelming and you just sign the paper, but realize that parents always have a choice to be involved in writing those plans. If they don't reach out to you when you want to talk about it, then please reach out to the school. You have a legal right to participate, and the student does, especially once they're 16, the student should be involved in those discussions as well. So within the IEP, I think a lot of you are aware of that. It lists the accommodations that need to be provided, but it also lists goals, especially if your child's program is modified compared to the regular curriculum. So within that goal part of the IEP, you can sneak in a lot of stuff about AAC. You can do that with accommodations as well, but I really like to see goals have explicitly written in there how they're going to use the AAC to access that curriculum and to look at what the student is learning. Another thing to be aware of is just the student records. So one thing, I'm going to talk about one-page profiles in a minute, but a lot of students with Rett syndrome, when you work in a school, you pull out the big drawer full of student files, and they're like this thick if you're a complex medical condition student, which I know I said that all backwards. But the problem with that, it's great to have lots of information. The bigger the records file, the more likely something's going to get lost in that about what you want them to know about your child. So one thing you can do is request a meeting to look at the records together. And if everyone in the school did this, it would drive the school crazy because it takes a long time. But what they'll do is before the meeting, they'll go through those records to make sure they're presentable for the parent. And that will kind of force them to spend more time reading about what you want them to know about your student. The other thing you can find out from that is whether there's stuff in there that you don't think is helpful. So if the school comes up with a safety or support plan for your child, they do not have a legal requirement to let parents know about that. So there could be negative labels in that folder, and you have a legal right to see that folder and discuss what's in there. So I'm just throwing those out there as some system things to keep an eye on. Okay, so one-page profiles and peer presentations. A lot of this is going to seem like it's not AAC related, but really AAC is everywhere, right? It's all part of what you're doing at school. So really helpful to look at some of the stuff available online about one-page profiles. I did share in one of the handouts a sample of what we used for Abby. The great thing about why you would do one page is you're trying to catch their attention and make it something that's quick to read, which I know sounds crazy because you want staff to spend all kinds of time learning about your child, and they will. But in the beginning, when they're just meeting them, you want something quick to catch their attention of the most important things, right? And it doesn't need to be all academic related. It can be like things that my child really wants you to know about me. And hopefully a lot of that is her or his voice. As much as possible, have them participate in that. Peer talks is something else that we've utilized a lot with our daughter is to ask, usually you don't have to make this something in the IEP, but we ask staff to go to the classrooms that are new to our child and talk to the students about how to communicate with her. Now, as time moved on, Abby started to take over those presentations herself using the Toby, so she'll talk about herself. But before that, we would ask staff to do that. If they're open to it in a non-COVID time, they might even volunteer to have the parent come in and talk to the class. Again, get your child's permission to be able to do that, but hopefully it's helping peers and teachers and educators in general to get to know how to have a conversation with them. And that's connected with the communication dictionaries, a thing that speech language pathologists put out there often. And it's a simple, you can find them online, or you can just make a table and with 3 columns and list some of the behaviors or observations you see with your child. And you really have to think about, as a parent, how you read the body language and just figure it out and respond. But not everyone can do that. So I'll show you a couple examples in a minute of the things that we told peers about for Abby. And I didn't really realize how important that was until her grade 8 teacher came to me and said, like, the kids in the class are going up to her. No, they want to talk to her. She goes right up in their space and doesn't say anything, of course, because she can't speak with her mouth. And they just kind of look scared because they're not sure how to react. And she said it would really help if you could explain like what they should do then. And that was a really simple thing that I hadn't thought of, and it made a big difference. The AAC content, you can involve peers in that as well. One thing I would often do is ask staff to provide photos of all the classmates to put on the device. And I'm always talking about devices here, but please keep in mind with low tech, you can do similar things, right? So not everybody has a eye gaze device. Communication circles is, again, something you can look up under online, but it's Caroline Musselwhite is the one that I would probably refer you to. It is a matter of getting a group of peers together to help brainstorm what kinds of things you want to have on the device so that they have some, I want to say teen talk, but it could be for younger kids too. What kinds of things would you say to your friends when you're that age? Because sometimes parents don't get it. Like, we don't know all of the lingo, right? Simply by asking for photos of staff and classmates, it requires them to spend more time thinking about that device. In some cases, they'll put their back up and say, we can't share photos. And it's fairly simple to just ask them to send home a letter. You can provide the body of the letter to let parents know why we're sharing them, that it won't be shared online, that we won't share their last names, whatever is needed. You can get around those privacy laws. Also provide photos of your family and friends from home so that your child could talk about them at school. You would be, I think you'd be surprised to see how many, in our school, it's mostly iPad talkers with Proloco, how many AAC systems do not have photos of real people in them. And that, I mean, Joe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, maybe later. But to me, that's crazy that you can't talk about people in your life without like looking to the generic little picture of boy, girl, mom, dad. So it's not something that's automatically done in schools, I would say. I've worked in a lot of different schools and it takes time, but it's something that you could insist on using your IEP, IPP, or just suggest it. I'm always in favor of making things friendly, at least at the beginning. If they won't do it, then you can dig deeper. I'm going to show you a little bit of this Prezi presentation that I made for Abby. I see some questions in the chat already, so I'll stop in a couple of slides and we can just see if I'm on the right track or if we need to stop and answer questions. The Prezi's a little wild. It was a big fad for like 3 years and it moves all over the place because it was a fun thing to do. So hopefully you won't get like seasick watching it, but I wanted to zoom through to the part where it talks about if I do this, it might mean this and you can do this. and it can give you some ideas. I think the link is in your handout, but you're welcome to look at that. It's publicly available if you want to get ideas for your own child. The one thing I, in hindsight, would have changed is that it's written in the first person, which is often a thing they do at schools. Like, I can do this, but Abby didn't write it. So it was made before she was able to write that much. In hindsight, I would have personally done it in third person and talk about her as, you know, the person writing it is not her. But you do, as much as possible, want to get their voice. So I'm going to zoom over to this. And can somebody tell me if you've seen, I'm not sure if it's sharing just my tab or the whole screen. Are you seeing Have You Met Abby right now?
Yes, we can see your whole
Awesome.
screen.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, so I'm gonna go, like I said, it's a little zoomy. And it's all no audio here. So it would be like you give it to a teacher and they would present it to their class. And then the kids could ask Abby questions after. And I utilized some of the videos we have online and did some prompts for discussion. If you're getting seasick, you can close your eyes for a minute. I'll tell you when we get to the part I'm looking for. Okay, so here I'm getting to the part where it says hints to help you learn my language. And this was presented probably the same year or maybe the year after she got her eye gaze system, her high tech. So there was a lot more reliance on using that body language. So it says, if I walk up to you and stare and smile, you can say hi and talk to me. I probably just want to say hi. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that would go in that communication dictionary. If I'm walking around in the halls while you're in class, which happened a lot, I might be trying to organize my nervous system, or I might need to do some physiotherapy. So in this case, Abby was someone who needed lots of breaks because her body just would go nuts if she had to sit still for too long, which kind of is a lot of students. You can say hi, or you can just ignore me. If I'm biting my hand or hitting my head, so this is a behavior that was seen a lot at school and it was a little scary for some people, and Abby wanted them to understand what's going on. I'm in some kind of pain because my body isn't working right. You can just stay calm and tell me it's going to be okay. If I'm making sounds like yeah or bo, I might be trying to start a conversation with you. You can learn to talk with me by learning to use my computer and by reading my eyes. And then it goes on to a little bit explain how to read her eyes and how to, actually, I'm going to zip through this a little bit because the ending I think might be handy. How to get involved with learning her computer system. See, this is where I was really having fun with the tech, but it takes away from the message. Want to know more about me. So this is another good idea, I think, if I do say so myself, to prompt involvement of peers, because a lot of times your child has an EA with them, and that prevents peers from getting involved in conversation. So if you've presented to this to the class, you can give them some ideas of what they can be doing and talking to your child about. So things that she's interested in talking about, things about her family, and then that reaching out and saying, come talk to me, tell me something about yourself. Show me a picture of your family, show me your favorite music videos, tell me what you like to do, friend me on Facebook, let's get to know each other. Okay, so that is an idea in a nutshell. And I'm going to zoom over to chat for a second. I know I'm probably against your order of things, but this to me makes more sense. So when you ask for photos of the student, is there a legal reason that the school can refuse? So I think I touched on that one. And there might be, depending on how you spin it. So there's privacy laws where they can't give out information about other students. But usually if the school says no, it's usually the case that they haven't even asked the parents yet. So I find once the parents know the reason for it and that you're going to guarantee you're not putting it out into the internet, then they're fine. And the school office always has a list of people who have refused, like they'll say, you may never take photos of my child, right? So there's ways around it in my experience. Sometimes we just kind of did it and didn't go through all the right channels of paperwork permission. And again, if the parents are fine, it's fine. Okay, I think those were the questions, but tell me if I'm missing something and we'll keep moving on. Okay, this is a boring slide, but these are some ideas of questions which are in your handout for when you meet with your school teams. So, do you know who works with your child at school? Sometimes it's like really obvious because they let you know a lot of things. But there might be people who are not in communication with you who work with your child. So just to be aware of what their names are. It's great if you can be a friendly, I want to say visitor, but you can't really visit the school, but somebody who sends messages frequently or notes or, little thank you messages. So schmooze your way in there, because the more they hear from you, the more they have your child on their mind. And in bigger schools, it's harder to grab that attention. But then in the whole training piece, so the next 3 questions are like, how are those people that work with my child learning to communicate? How are they learning to engage the child in conversation? So hopefully they're not saying, do this, do that, touch this, show me this word, because that's going to make a student with Rett syndrome shut down with apraxia, right? How are they facilitating conversations between peers? So if, again, the EA, if that's what you call them, is sitting right with your child, then the peers are less likely to come up unless there's a reason for it. In high school, even more so, right? Like it is not cool to go hang out with adults in high school. So I found I had to explicitly say, you need to give her some time alone, which means you can be across the other side of the room if you feel, if there's a need for that EA to be in the room. I also would explain a lot about apraxia and how if you're sitting right beside her, she's not going to perform, and you need to present the expectation, suggest something, move away, be quiet, see what happens. So there's all kinds of stuff around this. A lot of parents know what's needed in staff development, and a lot of frustration becomes that there's not enough staff that know how to work with your child. It's huge. So you want to make lots of noise in a nice way, if possible, to remind them. And just like every week, you can say, who is working with my child this week? Can you write down their names in the communication book? And then if you notice new names, you can say, did you want me to come in and talk with them or meet them online and give them some training? And if they're resistant to parents being involved, that will be their cue that they need to get with it and do that training, right? Because it takes time. And I hate the word training, but you know what I mean? Like it takes time to get to know how to work with someone with Rett syndrome without being really annoying and making them shut down from apraxia. How involved is your speech language pathologist is a good question. It's the case where most of them are stretched really thinly, and we are in a school with probably 1,500 students, and we see this SLP once a month. So the fact that I'm quite able to, edit the talkers and do the in-house training is helpful. And maybe that's why she doesn't come as much, but that's not enough support. And you can try to suggest or even get into the IEP that you need all new EA support people, resource teachers, anybody who's coming to work with your child who's new. You require them to have a 1-hour meeting with the speech language pathologist about how to work with your child. And there's PA days, right? Or whatever you guys call them, PD days, usually between terms or between semesters. And that can be arranged. It's tricky, but it's not an unreasonable thing to ask for, because you want them to know how to model and present language and all of those good things that we need to do with AAC. Another good question is to ask who's developing the learning goals and how do they determine what's next? Because I know I found with our child, the learning goals would come back to us. You know, we thought we had consulted about the IP, and then it would come back that, you know, for, I might be exaggerating, 10 years in a row, she's learning the difference between the letter A and B. She's learning her colors. Like we did that in grade 1. And so there wasn't really good tracking from year to year about what she's already achieved. And so regardless of whether you have a child who you're trying to keep at grade level by doing lots of work, if they're like Abby, she was in school and she had everything modified for 0 credit because we wanted to just focus on learning things without worrying about the reporting. So we're not on it's not a race, but we still wanted goals that were appropriate for her learning level. Okay. And in most cases, the educators do not know how to do that. Right. So, I mean, a lot of us are doing this training to learn more about how to teach students with Rett syndrome. It's very common that no one in the school knows how to do that. They also are not allowed to say that to you because then they become liable for lawsuits. So they'll talk around it. And so what you want to be able to do is just put it out on the table about like any possible solutions about how we can learn this. So you could get them handouts or books or send videos. Take some videos of what you've seen your child do at home that might show that current level of achievement. So for example, if you know she already knows all her letters and sounds, then try to see what evidence you have that you can bring forward to the next year's teacher, right? So it saves all of that, like trying goals that are way too easy. And I know for Abby, she would just refuse to participate if it was too easy. So one time they asked her like, oh, Abby, show me how you spell bus, which is really not a fun thing to ask. Like put it into a context, people. Don't just say, spell a word for me. And she was still learning spelling, but she typed in ECZ, which we interpreted to mean easy. So she didn't spell bus. So if you weren't able to understand Abby's way of being, you would check off she doesn't know how to spell bus, right? So they need to know those nuances of people like Abby, and I would say Joe Picard, you might fit into that sarcasm category as well, where you're not gonna play that game of appeasing them when you know it's ridiculous what they've just asked you to do. And then asking about like, how are we keeping in touch, right? I'm going to keep moving here so we don't run out of time because I could talk on and on about these things. So meaningful learning goals, your big job is to make sure they know your child can learn. So there's still way too much stuff out there that says a student with Rett syndrome is not capable of learning. And a lot of it comes from the medical field and the scientific research field. I would say the education field is more open to saying every child can learn and that they just don't necessarily know how to make that happen. So you have to keep sending that message that, no, I expect her to do more and she is going to learn to read and write. And you will be met by people who say, I don't think so. And you're just going to keep repeating that message because we now know that they are quite intelligent, an average range of intelligence. There's no cognitive disability. There's lots of physical and motor response disabilities, which makes it impossible to assess their intelligence using all of those ways that they do it. And that's a whole other can of worms because I don't think we should be assessing anyone's intelligence because all students can learn. Success criteria is the word that they use in schools to say, like, is this student successful with that goal that we set, right? So if they're not allowing for apraxia and response time, then it's not a valid statement to say she did not succeed in meeting that goal, for example, right? So in the goal, it should be written some kind of phrase, and I know Susan Norwell has great goal ideas, and I can send you some too if anybody's looking at writing goals, but it has to have a phrase where it says allowing for plenty of response time, right? Or allowing for not having somebody sit right beside her when she's trying to do it. And the same goes for repetitive trials. A lot of goals, they feel like they need to be measurable. It says that in the documentation. So that you'll see lots of phrases where it says 3 out of 5 times, right? And then the teacher interprets that to be like, I got to ask her the same thing 5 times. Do not do that with Rett syndrome. They will just say, forget it, because it's way too much work with apraxia. So you can measure by using words like daily, regularly, 3 times per week, right? The teacher will provide an opportunity to blah, blah, blah on a regular basis, and that's measurable, right? The other thing that's measurable is there's lots of assessment tools we use now, which are based on observation. So the bridge assessment is one that you may have heard of, and it's the EAs, teacher, and parents. They all do the assessing by saying what they've seen that student do. They don't sit down and say, I want you to do this for me. So it's looking at over time what we've noticed, and therefore as a team we've decided she's at this level and ready to move on to the next thing. We want to make sure that they're not directly saying, can you please point to this word for me? Because first of all, that's boring, but it also shuts down the response because of apraxia. So there's lots of ways to model the use of AAC without asking them to do anything. And then they're going to jump in and start doing it because they want to talk to you. But we have to make sure there's no demands to do something right now. And accommodations for sensory regulation. Karen Erickson has a really good graphic somewhere, which I forgot to include, which has to do with, it has like the green, yellow, and red zones. And it's basically saying, if this one task you're asking the student to do is really hard, it takes their whole body, that's a red zone, then you want to make sure all the other things you're asking them to do are green, like they're not hard to do. So if you're asking them to do a cognitive task that takes lots of thinking, make sure their seating and their sound in the environment and any visual stimulation is not hard to deal with, right? So if they're trying to navigate a bunch of people in the classroom and the noise of the fan over there, and they're worried about tipping over, and then you're asking them to respond on their AAC, that's way too much. And nobody would be able to do that if they had all the things going on in their body that some of these girls do, right? So, and again, sometimes boys. So the accommodations for realizing all of those sensory things is huge. I have in one of Abby's, I think the sample profile says that she can't necessarily look at something and listen to you at the same time. And teachers are terrible for this. They'll put up a PowerPoint. They'll ask you to read it while they're talking to you, which is maybe what I'm doing right now, but I'm not asking you to read that because it's in the handout. Which if you have Rett syndrome and you really need to concentrate on what's being said, it might be new material or there might be too much background noise, then by closing your eyes or looking down, you're making your hearing a lot easier to navigate, if that makes sense. So I stumbled on this a lot when Abby was little. We'd try to sit and read a book together and she wouldn't look at the book. And I thought, oh, she doesn't like books, right? But she might've been trying to get her body organized. She might've been trying to listen to the story, right? So teaching reading and stuff like that is really tricky when you have to think about all of those things. But the first step is for you to be aware of it and to make staff aware of that. Thinking outside the box for goals. So just briefly, again, I could say more about this, but just so hand over hand stuff, like those hands-on classes like art. I've gone through a lot of learning with this, and partly it's by reading books by people who have grown up with this going on. And saying like, why did the parents let them do this to me? Because it'll be craft time and the EA is trying to be helpful. And so they'll grab the kid's hand and like help pretend they're helping them to make the craft. And then they'll send home this fancy thing. and your child just sat there and had their hands moved, right? So I then for years said, do not put my kid in a cooking or art class because I don't want any of that hand over hand stuff going on. And so what I did was limited the opportunities for Abby by saying, don't let her in those classes. We discovered really late in high school that she absolutely loves art. And so someone talked me into trying an art class, and I said, there's going to be no touching her hands. In fact, it says in her profile, no hand over hand. And so we came up with her telling the EA what to do. So most of art and creativity is what you're thinking. And she would make choices and she would direct the drawings or the whatever the art was. And then the EA would document which parts she did and which parts Abby did. And it was amazing. And she's still, her whole room at home is covered in prints of artists' work. She loves to go to art galleries, and you know, we figured this out really late, but it was one of her favorite courses. Cooking probably wasn't one of her favorite courses, but she went in there, and I know that you can have like switches that make the machines go. But I said again, like, sure, if she wants to do that, go for it. But we want to use her communication in cooking class, right? So she would be involved in talking about the cooking, but her favorite thing was when it was done, the groups of students would bring their samples to Abby. And she had a page that was like a food critic page on her AAC, and she would comment. And her favorite thing to say was, keep your day job. And then they would all laugh and think, oh, that's hilarious. And then she would do more because she's getting that attention from peers. They set up an Instagram account where they would take a picture of the food and a picture of her comment and send it out into the internet Instagram world. So there's some ideas for documenting. The main thing is to make sure you're not getting EAs doing the work and documenting it as your child's work, because they really just want to finish the assignment and be helpful. So ways you can do that is ask them to take photos of what's on the device. This was an example from Abby's foods class, and she had some kind of curry dish and was talking about how it was spicy and volume down. This was just from the regular communication book. So the EA knew enough that the actual words that she said put together meant a message that might be helpful for home to know about. And sometimes when you're new at AAC, you're not fluent yet, it takes years, you have to put together pieces of clues. And we did a lot of back and forth with this EA to figure out some things Abby was trying to tell us. And I don't think we would have figured it out if we didn't both participate in that. This is it was an app about things that she said on her talker, on her device. And they clearly labeled which part the teacher said and which part Abby said. So teacher said, what would you do if you lived by yourself? And the teacher did the sentence starter, I would feel. And then Abby said, disappointed, mad, mad, disappointed, scared, mad. And then the teacher said, if your parents are gone for 2 months, what would you need to do? And Abby said, friends, stroller, ride, outside music, which was kind of funny. But it shows us which part she participated in. And then I had tons of examples from art. Like I said, she just ended up really loving it. But here's an example of, it was a Remembrance Day assignment. And she chose by eye gaze choices, the pictures she wanted to put in the collage. We thought it was really interesting how much there was of eyes in there. And she said unhappy ocean. So they took pictures of those communication pieces and put it into the art project, which I thought was really cool. The other thing that they'll do is to start a Google Doc, put a picture, and then just write in there what the context was so that we can talk about it at home and also keep track of what she's learning. So I know you may have questions. I just want to go show you quickly. That's the wrong tab. It's in here. The other two handouts, which I'm not going to read through, but just so you can look at them if you want to. One is an example of a profile. If I were doing a one-page profile, I would probably make it more graphically interesting. But this was one that the school had set up the categories. And I asked if I could take it and add stuff or take away stuff. they were really good with me, where I was like, I don't like that. Can I edit that for you? So that's another option, is to say, like, do you have information that you share with new teachers? Can I see what that is? In case I might be able to give you some helpful tips.
Hey, Karen,
So-
are you sharing that screen right now?
Oh, maybe not. I am trying to, but you know what? I'm going to stop sharing because it's on a PDF, which probably is making it hard to see. So I will share, but like I said, it's in the handouts. It's hopefully coming up now. You see it there?
Yeah, it's there now. Thank you.
Thank you for telling me. So the categories were, again, not exactly how I would design it. There's some better ones online. And I probably shouldn't have kept people's names in there, but you can see where I added in stuff, like repetitive trials do not work. They didn't put that in there, I did, right? Abby may refuse to respond if she deems the task too easy. Again, that wasn't staff that knew that. So parents can be involved in stuff like this. Again, it works best if you can just say, I'm trying to help out here. This was huge for me once I realized how much of a problem it was in schools. Do not use hand over hand. And it's still something that you see happening now and then, although most staff are kind of catching on that that's not appropriate for most students. This document, you can use it or not. It was something I put together for a student who, with Rett syndrome, I was helping in their school because they were having trouble just knowing where to begin. And so it's a very general thing. What I found, and I found this as a parent too, if you can get something that came from someone else besides yourself, that looks like it might be some kind of expertise, then they actually give that more value than the parent, which is crazy. But if you can use it in that way, feel free to grab it and use it. If you want to take it and tweak it to make it your own, then that's fine too, obviously. But some of the general things about Rett syndrome, if you gave them this, then that's more helpful to schools than what they might Google online. When Abby was young, and I don't know if this is still an issue, they every year would put her identification as autism, because somebody looked up Rett syndrome online, and in the DSM-4, it was under the autism umbrella. And I know that some people have dual diagnosis, but she, like, the stuff they were doing to help people with autism was totally wrong for her, because they didn't account for apraxia. So that's just, it would have been nice to have something where I could say, here, this is what you're supposed to do for Rett syndrome, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen sharing. And I feel like I'm going over time. How are we doing? I'm ready for some questions. Do you want to read them to me, or do you want me to go through the chat? It's up to you. I feel like I'm doing all the talking. So let me just...
You don't have to worry too much about time. It's
Okay,
more
good.
so
I
your
usually
time.
talk too much. So what do you do when staff in school refuse a communication log home? Okay, good question. There's a lot of stuff you could do when they're refusing to be what I might call helpful, including, like, there's a process in every province to go through to have meetings. But like I said, I find, start with sweetness, and you can get pretty far with that. And if the relationship breaks down, then you need to bring in somebody else to meet with you. But the refusing part, I would want to know more about why. I would say there's probably lots of angles to say that legally they need to do that, especially if your child can't speak easily through the mouth. Then how are you going to get that information back and forth? So my first go-to might be to say, hey, can we talk about the IEP? Can we build some more communication goals in there? And so let's have an accommodation where, in order to support her communication, let's have staff writing something that happened during the day, and then the parent has to write something that happened last night to go back to school, because it goes both ways. And that way you have a context of what to talk about, right? And it's framed as it's all part of helping the communication, because to support AAC, you need to know a context, like, what are we going to talk about? You need to have something to engage that student in wanting to talk to you, right? So if you can say, hey, I heard you went to visit your cousin's puppy on the weekend, then that's something that we want to talk about. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, Holly, but that would be my first go-to, is to try to frame it as a goal that's needed to develop that communication. Joe, you and Abby are two peas in a pod. Okay, we would love to have a list of goals. Love the cooking class idea. Yeah, so I can share a goal. I don't have like I might be able to put together some or find you guys some goals, because I tend to make them up in the spot based on the kid. But I could definitely share with people some generic ones if that helps. I didn't get into goal writing too much, but it's a big part of what I do in my job, is to take the regular curriculum, figure out what would work with someone with Rett syndrome, or not Rett syndrome, any student that I work with, and to write that into the IEP. What if they asked your child if it's okay to hold their hand, or would you recommend just not doing it at all? I would love to hear Joe's take on that one, but I would say I recommend not doing it at all. I think anytime you're going to touch a child at school, you need to ask permission, unless it's a safety situation where you're like worrying about somebody getting hurt, right? The big thing, I was able to bring in an occupational therapist who knew Abby really well, because she worked with her for a while. And she said, she was very blunt. She'd say, you're not getting anything in those hands. I've tried all these things, and we're going to not even have working with hands as a goal. I know some people are still working on that fine motor stuff, but it was becoming such a problem that they thought they could like make her hold a pen or whatever, that I asked her to get involved and let them know. So that's another trick you can use, is to get one of those allied professionals who may be more on the same page as you, to go and coach your team at school if things aren't going quite the way you want them to. Now, that said, there might be a reason for it. There's also something called underhand, where it's the opposite of hand over hand. You guys know what I mean. I just can't think of the way to explain it. But basically, the child's hand is riding on yours so that they get the idea. In most cases with Rett syndrome, I would say it's not a goal that's going to be your top priority, right? Because we know, based on a lot of case studies over the years, that hand function is not an easy thing to develop with Rett syndrome. So let's talk more about how you can meet those cognitive goals with a different, they call it alternative pencil, or a different writing tool. Thank you, Christina, for putting in some of the organizations, because like I said, education is provincially can be different, a little bit more different. So Joe's saying never hand over hand. OT here pushes hand over hand. Ooh, that's a problem, I think, Amy. So the hand over hand thing is a big, I feel like we need to do more of that, getting information out there. Joe, you can write a blog post for us. I have to tell you, the book that really got me was when I read Ghost Boy. So if you ever get the chance to read it, it's pretty heavy, but it's a young man who wrote about his experience of becoming, they call it locked in syndrome. So he was fully aware of everything, which is very similar to, I would say, everyone with Rett syndrome. But everyone thought he wasn't aware of anything. So they sent him to this day program, and they were doing finger painting, and he described what it felt like to have someone grabbing his hands and putting them in the finger paint. It was just like, oh, you can't unsee that. So you might want to grab the book Ghost Boy and find that page and send it in. But the thing that hit me there was that he said, I don't know why none of the parents complained. And I thought, oh, that was a moment where I was like, I'm always the people pleaser, as if I can be. As a parent, I didn't want to rock the boat. But as soon as I saw that, like literally the next week, they sent home a craft that Abby had made. And I sent it back and I said, which part of this did Abby do? Please don't send this home anymore unless it's her work. And then we actually had a meeting about it. So just maybe work on that empathy piece. It's disappointing to hear OTs are still saying that, because they should be the ones who are a little more up to speed. Thanks for the Ghost Boy link. Oh, and I like this idea. So Trish gave the book to Emma's staff. It was really good for everyone. So that's another great idea, is to start to build the empathy by showing them some material that's out there to read about the experience. Kathy Howery's work, I know Joe, you helped with that, I think, has a lot of good stuff about the lived experience of someone who uses AAC. The other piece, this is also related to AAC, there's a really recent film out by Jordan Zimmerman, which is on Vimeo, streams on Vimeo. You have to pay like for a month of having it. And I think it's called This Is Not About Me. So I know one of our techies there will Google that and put the link in there. But it was, I showed it at our latest PA day in Stratford here to all of the EAs and a bunch of teachers. And we brought in the autism team and the speech team and had some small group discussion. And I have to say, like, I don't have a research study around this, but anecdotally, after they saw that, they kept coming to me and saying, look what this student is doing, and here's something wrong with her talker, and I need you to help fix it. And they just got so inspired to try to make it work for the students who use talkers, that I couldn't have done that on my own. So they had to see this. It's a documentary about Jordan's life in school and how they had her labeled as a behavior problem. And then how she eventually was able to communicate and tell her story. And she narrates a bunch of the story, and they follow her around and ask her questions and stuff. So it just shows that potential. And it's really, really powerful to show a staff group. Sometimes the hard thing is to find time for that to happen, but I just happened to have seen it. And there was a PA day where I found an hour. Actually, they didn't even tell me we had time. I just said, we're doing this. And it's easier for me to do because I work in a school. And tell me if there's a problem. And they were like, yeah, go for it. So I think a lot of stuff in school that doesn't happen is because people are busy and tired, and they need a leader to just suggest something and make it happen. And so as parents, you can always volunteer that. And like I said, if they don't want your involvement for whatever reason, it's at least giving them an idea of what they could be doing. All right, any other questions? I'm going to stop for a minute, and you guys can let me know if you want to hear more. Joe, what did I forget? I know that some people are going to be watching the recording later too, so feel free to reach out to me if something's been confusing, or like I said, couldn't cover everything. Oh, Joe, you're too kind. Nothing, it was great. There's a lot. I think our biggest challenge right now with schools is just that lack of knowledge of how to teach someone with Rett syndrome. It's relatively new. I mean, obviously we probably could have figured it out years ago, but the research is relatively new about how to find ways to assess reading and stuff, because it blows people's mind that you could learn to read if you can't speak. So keep that perspective in mind if you're working with schools and they're not being helpful, is they might just not know how to make it work. And so that's one way to start a conversation, is let's find some information and work on how. Sabrina?
Karen, this was such a great eye-opening presentation. Thank you so much, especially for newer families like myself, trying to implement these strategies at school. And I've taken a lot from this presentation that I'm gonna, maybe tomorrow make a phone call. But actually what I'm interested in knowing is, and I might have missed it because Ella needed my attention, but is there a
I just
curriculum?
lost your audio there for a second.
Oh, can you hear me now? Hello?